Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another tier list with the latest Deadlock update. I've waited a few days to make sure I got a lot of games in and asked a lot of people for input before making this tier list to make sure that I had the best possible subjective opinion. First off, I want to say that in this patch, they did an overall adjustment to all healing and anti-healing. All heroes that have some sort of healing abilities had their healing reduced a lot. But at the same time, they've also reduced the healing reduction a lot. And I believe the reason for this is to make games less polarized. So basically that if you're not buying any anti-heal, you'll still be slightly more fine. Because before, everybody healed a shit ton, and then all the healing reduction reduced a shit ton. So by reducing it on both ends, it means that you would have to buy more anti-heal items to counter, for instance, a Shiv or Abrams going crazy, but they're also less likely to go as crazy on the self-healing. So it's just an overall rebalance. However, I think this affects some heroes more than other, namely those heroes that have a lot of self-healing. So overall, this is a nerf to the survivability of heroes like Abrams, but he's slightly less countered to anti-heal. So where does that put Abrams on the tier list? Well, one thing they added this patch was that his Siphon Life is stronger. It also scales with Spirit Power, and there is a new melee item. And this new melee item is really good for heroes like Abrams and Shiv, because not only does it steal spirit resist from the enemy, it also gives him more spirit power. So when you are in melee combat now, you can actually build a lot of melee items and tanky items, and you can still ramp up a lot of damage throughout a team fight. So this affects a bunch of heroes, obviously. But I will say, I've also been watching a lot of pro tournaments recently, and Abrams just seems to be in every single game. He still has a lot of stun lock, a lot of crowd control. You're kind of forced to play around him with counters. His ult is great for stealing mid-boss. It makes him CC immune for multiple seconds when it's maxed. So I do think that he's S tier based on what I've asked other people too. I put him in A tier last time, but I do think that even though his regeneration is slightly worse than it used to be, so it's like slightly easier to kill, it doesn't feel like you can fully counter him in the same way as you used to with like Toxic Bullets and Decay. You would have to buy at least 2 anti-heal items instead of 1 now. Anyway, moving on to Bebop. Bebop had a small little change now. They added that his 60% weapon damage buff from Exploding Uppercut now applies to melee. Also, a quality of life update where the hook can now be cancelled by allies. So you could already cancel your hook on allies by pressing space or your cancel key, but now allies can do the same, which makes it even easier. The uppercut damage increase means that there is more potential for melee builds with Bebop now, especially with the new Spirit Snatch item too. You could ramp up a lot of damage on your bombs by just kind of like fighting in close combat. But I still think that Bebop isn't necessarily a natural melee fighter. He does have a pretty high health pool in general, but none of his abilities really excel at melee combat. But I can see how he works as a brawler. I've completely stopped playing Bomb Bebop. I think it's completely troll to play mid Phantom and upwards. It works in lower to mid elos, but I think people are getting better at countering that build. It becomes harder and harder to build bomb stacks. You'll just instantly face 2 enemies who both buy Reactive Barrier, and then mid to late game, if you don't hit your hooks, you're basically useless. They also nerfed his ult healing. Again, that was just like every other hero who has any sort of like self-sustain ability. Bebop's ult now heals 80% instead of 100. Bebop isn't great. His gun bop is okay, and hybrid and tank bop is also okay, but under no circumstance would you ever have Bebop over Paradox, for instance. That's all I can say. All right, next up, we have Dynamo. So Dynamo had quite a bit of changes this time. Not like huge changes, but some quality of life stuff. One of them being his Stomp is now much easier to hit because it slides around geometry when it hits an obstruction. This was like an issue before where sometimes when you play Dynamo and you Stomp, it just hits a small object and it stops. Rejuve Aura now allows you to reload during it, and pulling allies no longer cancels their channel. So you can use your Quantum Entanglement to, for instance, TP a Warden while he's channeling his ult and it doesn't stop it. For instance, one thing that was really cool to do was if a Bebop is ulting, you can reposition him with Quantum Entanglement. But yeah, it doesn't cancel the Warden's ult and stuff anymore. Another interesting thing is that they made the ally range bigger on Quantum Entanglement, and then they added some of the cooldown reduction to the tier 3 talent instead, which makes sense because I think it's a very strong ability without any talent points. And also, you can now melee before the tier 3 upgrade. So when you fully upgrade Rejuve Aura, you can run around and shoot, reload everything and cast. But before that, you're just standing still like this and healing. But now you can also melee, so you're not completely useless. However, this also added a very funny bug, and I'm going to show you guys right now. I think this is going to get fixed. But because they added this melee interaction, it means that if you fully upgrade your Rejuve Aura, the melee thing now overrides your ult cast, and you can now melee while ulting.
Help, please!
And you can move around while ulting, or you can also damage. You get 2 free heavy melees in on whoever you're ulting. if you just pop Rejuve Aura. All right, anyway, back to the tier lists. So, with that being said, where do we put Dynamo? Well, there is a new item called Arcane Surge. This item, after you dash jump, you gain 20% more duration, 20% more reach, and some spirit power. And this item is just made for Dynamo. If you have your ult, you kinetic dash in and you get a gigantic ult that lasts for much longer. And it only covers 1 spirit slot, meaning that you can buy a lot of gun items. You can buy like bullet resist shredder and stuff on spirit and lean quite heavily into gun, but still have a super efficient ult. Previously, you had to like invest much more heavily in spirit items to get a good Dynamo ult because you needed both reach, duration, and cooldown. And this makes it kind of much more efficient, especially because it still keeps the kinetic dash element of the item. So it also gives you fire rate and extra stamina. And I think that Dynamo right now is just the crown on S tier. I just think that Dynamo has been the king of the hill for so long, and he stays there. I think that he was already really good before this, and now they added some quality of life on the Stomp. There are some builds with Stomp where you can do like 600-700 damage with the Stomp because of improved burst and the spirit scaling, and the range scales with it too. So Dynamo is very fun and has a lot of builds that work, and you can lean very heavily into damage but still have really good ult, especially because of Arcane Surge. All right, next up we have a Great Talon. So Great Talon, they increased his gun damage a little bit as well as his health, but they really nerfed his trap. So it's basically like a Vindicta tether, except it's got activate time. It's just not very good. And that's pretty much all that they changed to Great Talon right now. I don't know. I don't think Great Talon is that great. I have not seen a lot of Great Talon in tournaments either. I feel like in the current meta, he's very easy to run down. And they also nerfed his air dash a lot recently. So I'm gonna chuck him in C tier. I don't know if I'm biased based on playing Paradox and Bebop and stuff, because I just never have a problem with Great Talon, but I think he's pretty bad. All right, and then we have Haze. Haze has gotten a lot of changes this patch. They fixed the quality of life issues where Bullet Dance would just freeze your client. Obviously very good. Using items during Smoke Bomb no longer breaks invisibility, so you can Magic Carpet, you can Majestic Leap, and you'll still be invisible, which is insane. Smoke Bomb cooldown reduced. You now get sprint speed on tier 1 Smoke Bomb, so you can roam really early on, really fast and gank. So that makes Haze's early game a lot better. And one very interesting thing is that Smoke Bomb tier 3 is changed from 30% bullet lifesteal to phases out on cast and enables charges with 10-second charge time. And this makes sense because the ability is called Smoke Bomb, and a Smoke Bomb is meant to be like you throw it on the ground, you disappear, and you like disjoin some projectiles and stuff. And it's definitely strong because it also has charges, so you can buy rapid recharge and dodge some projectiles. But it's not, I don't think it's as insane as you think it is. but it definitely adds some more survivability. One thing that is really interesting is that, first of all, they reduced fixation damage to objectives because Haze could sometimes just fry the patron with the ult. But this is probably the most interesting change for Haze. So previously, when you went spirit builds with Haze, you would basically have maybe Echo Shard, double Sleep Dagger builds, because also Haze's ammo scales with spirit. But the problem with those builds was always that it's just like playing Gun Bop. Your ult is just a farming tool. Like you wouldn't use it at all. This kind of changes all of that. Now the ult has spirit damage and spirit scaling, meaning that it's harder to counter Haze ult with Metal Skin, which was one of the biggest drawbacks. And it opens up for a plethora of other items, even items like Arcane Surge, the new item. So I do think that Haze has a lot better playability now. There's a lot more builds that will work, and it doesn't feel like you're as pigeonholed into one playstyle, which is just like an ult bot. You can have a lot of different items and play the hero well. And Haze is jumping up to the A tier now. Well, one thing about Haze is that she's always been really squishy, but I do think that this patch, it's easier to make builds where Haze is less squishy. You don't have to just build insane gun damage and no greens. All right, next up we have Infernus. So in the previous patch, they made it harder for Infernus to build up Afterburn, and now they're kind of adjusting it so that the build-up decay time is slower. So what this means is that whenever you shoot at a target, it starts to build up a debuff, but it doesn't actually become Afterburn before it's all the way built up. So in the laning stage, this means that it takes longer for you to like hide and let the debuff go down again to avoid getting actually hit by Afterburn, and before you can peek again. So this is a little buff to Infernus, mostly in the laning stage, I think. It doesn't have a lot of impact throughout the game other than that. They also made the ult a little bit better and the upgrade of the ult a little bit worse. So overall, it doesn't change much other than that you don't have to get tier 2 talent that early for Infernus. I still think that Infernus is pretty strong. I think this nerf to anti-heal and nerf to healing favors Infernus, because I think that you would need to buy more than one anti-heal item to actually counter him. Because it's not like Abrams where like a huge part of his passives was just taken away. They didn't reduce the healing on the items as much as they reduced the healing on some of the abilities. So I still think that Infernus is probably up here. I'm not sure if I think Haze is better than Infernus now. I can't quite place them, but I feel like they are very, very, very similar. Maybe Haze is a little bit better. But yeah, they're both very good carries. Okay, and then we have Ivy. Ivy had Stoneform, Drag Down, Collision improved a bit. So that's when you're Stoneforming above someone and it takes them with you to the ground. They increased the bullet damage and then reduced the bullet damage growth. So this basically means that in the end you have like similar damage, but she's slightly better early game. And one thing that I found very interesting was that they buffed the speed of the ult. So now the speed of your ult is affected by movement speed or sprint items when out of combat. And it amplifies the sprint values by 1.5x. And this is something that's pretty interesting to me. They did reduce the cooldown by 5 seconds and reduce the duration by 1 second. But I think overall, this is like a pretty big buff for one of the things that Ivy does really well, which is just instantly deliver the urn. This is like the F1 urn delivery. And I think Ivy excels as a lot of things. She can be played as gun. You have the escalating exposure build that tosses down traps and just annoys people everywhere. I feel like it's one of the heroes that has the most all-around toolkits. You have bullet lifesteal, fire rate, and you can share it with a teammate. You can stun while going immune and heal yourself. You have an ult that you can fly everywhere and drop a bomb and silence people, and you can pick up people with it as well. And the gun is extremely strong. I think this puts Ivy up here. Anyone who's played against a good Ivy, you probably know what it feels like when you just hear that flight sound and you just start running. And everybody just starts running. And that kind of fear effect and the area denying is surprisingly good, because sometimes it can make people split up and force them to fight in areas they don't want to play. All right, Next up, we have Kelvin. Kelvin actually had only a small change, and that was a small nerf to the Ice Path, where the Lash's abilities will now break through the Ice Path, which makes sense because I saw some clips where people played that the speed build with Kelvin, and they would just like run the Ice Path in circles around the patron, and people couldn't like Lash ult you through and stuff. Obviously, that just needed to be fixed, which it is. Kelvin is just always a good pick. It feels always good to have Kelvin on your team. His ult can change so many team fights, can win you so many objectives. Even if you freeze the patron with his ult, it's still great. I don't think there's much change to Kelvin this patch. I just think he, in general, is really good. He's mostly played as a support in higher elo or like a support hybrid because going rescue beam on him is super strong. But yeah, I think he's definitely A tier. And then we have Lady Geist. Lady Geist didn't have a lot of changes. The Essence Bomb's self-damage spirit scaling was reduced, so that's a little buff to her survivability, because the funny thing about how the Essence Bomb scales is that it actually does more damage to her than to the enemy, which is why you always have to buy spirit armor on Geist. Geist has been pretty good for a long time now. She was one of the best heroes for a short time when both Mystic Reverb and Malice, which was much stronger, and I still think she's fine now. I think that the Malice plus Mystic Reverb nerf hit her quite hard and changed the way she's played, but I still think she's pretty competitive. But I think I'll put her at the like very top of B tier. Geist is like one of those heroes where you just spam your bombs a lot, usually, and clear out waves. And the playstyle is pretty telegraphed. When you see that she has her ult, you know exactly what she's gonna do. She's gonna like try to warp stone in an ulti and stuff. So she's very susceptible to getting killed with silence glyphs or curse, stuff like that. And she doesn't have any hard CC other than that her suck also silences. So yeah, I think she's pretty much the same as before. I don't think she really would build any of the new items. So there's not really much to say about her other than that. Lash, not much changes. They seem to be pretty happy with where Lash is at. Ground Strike, Drag Down, Collection. Okay, that's the same treatment as Ivy got. Also a good hero. Very, very countered by slowing Hex and silences. He's very dependent on having stamina and flying in the air. And Lash has never been the same since they removed one extra charge on Rapid Recharge and removed stamina on the grapple. I still think he's a great hero, and he was definitely too good once when that was a thing. But I think it's one of those one-trick heroes where some people are just insanely good at him because he has a high skill cap, similar to Pocket, for instance, or Viscous. I feel like I've seen a lot of games where Lash also doesn't have that much impact because, again, it's another one like Lady Geist where it's a little bit telegraphed. Like if he has ult, you kind of know what he's going to do and you get better at playing around it. I think when the game first came out, I think Lash was one of the most OP heroes because people weren't that good at playing around it and people weren't buying slowing Hex, knockdowns, silence glyphs, all that. So yeah, I think Lash belongs in B tier. I still think he's pretty strong, but I still think he's not quite up where he used to be. Next up, we have McGinnis. McGinnis have received a lot of changes, actually. They increased her bullet velocity. They fixed a bug on the wall. But here's something that is very interesting, and I needed to actually like experience this in game before I had an opinion on it. But basically, the turrets no longer scale to the hero's health. And the spirit resist reduction was reduced greatly, but their base health was increased a lot. But they now gain health per boon, and they take at most, this is the big one for me, they take at most 33% of their max HP per second from any damage source. Meaning that turrets will always live for 3 seconds. Now at first I wasn't sure how this was going to affect the gameplay, but having played a lot against and with McGinnis, I was playing a full day of duos with Seagull as well, so I got his input on it. And this change is quite crazy. And not just that, but the cycle time, so the turrets now also attack twice as fast and they have increased bullet velocity. So I think that the current McGinnis turret build is broken. I think it's way too strong. I was playing maybe for 4 or 5 hours where Seagull was playing his turret build almost every game, and the amount of damage she does is insane. And not just that, but here's the thing. Because the turrets now have less HP, but they take at most 30% of their max HP per second, it means that they also are much easier to heal. So you can put down your heal, or you can buy Healing Nova, and you can actually out-heal the damage the turrets take a lot of the time, because it takes at least 3 seconds to kill them, regardless of how much damage they're taking. So this just gives McGinnis a ton of sustain. And I actually think this is the strongest McGinnis has ever been. And I do believe that they will make some adjustments. With that being said, I'm putting her next to Dynamo in S tier. It's actually easier to kill McGinnis than her turrets. Okay. All right, next up we have Miragi. Mirage's tornado speed got reduced. And they fixed Tornado being able to use while immobilized, because, and that's a pretty big nerf, because you could like Tornado out of traps and shit, and you could just, there was just so many things you could just Tornado out of. So they definitely made that a little bit weaker. I think Tornado is probably one of the strongest basic abilities in the game still. It is essentially almost a Wraith ult that you can also use to iframe abilities with. It's like Dynamo's Quantum Entanglement on crack. They also increased the cooldown of his ult, but then added a bigger cooldown increase on the tier 2 talent. So this is just like rebalancing of his power spike. It doesn't make any difference late game. One thing that is very interesting is that Traveler can now be cast by targeting the top bar portraits. This is a very, very good quality of life change, because sometimes it's really hard to like press the right icons on the map and stuff. So being able to just press the minimap, now press the portraits at the top, is a big quality of life improvement. And it's something that I've already been doing in Dota for quite a while. So I kind of assumed that that would eventually come here. I think Mirage has definitely grown on me overall. I usually put Mirage pretty low, but I've also seen that he can be very impactful as a solo laner. He can be very impactful as a split pusher. I don't think he's very affected by any of the new items either. I don't think he buys any of them. So the patch doesn't really change much, other than that his Tornado is a little worse. But I think I'm putting him just above Lash in B tier. Okay. Then we have Mr. Mo and Krillithy. So Mo and Krill received quite some interesting changes this patch. One of them was that in the previous patch, he got a lot of headshot resistance, and then now they removed it from the small head, which makes sense, because the idea was that because his character has 2 heads, he's very easy to headshot, and they added some headshot resistance to it. But it's not easy to headshot the small guy at the top. So they removed the resistance from the small guy, meaning that if you want to do more damage to Mo, you want to headshot the little dude. Burrow can now go under Spectral Wall. That makes sense, and that's a pretty big buff. It makes it much harder to catch Mo and Krill against McGinnis. Another interesting thing is that combo now pulls the target towards you over time. This changes some interactions. So you used to be able to, for instance, hook your teammate, and Mo and Krill would follow. That doesn't work anymore. And I'm not sure if that's intended or not, because that used to be like a way of countering stuff before, where like Mo and Krill ults your teammate and you could just rescue beam him back to you, and then Mo and Krill would also be pulled. But because of the combo now pulling the target towards you over time, that changed that interaction as well. But a very big buff is that his health gain is increased from 30 to 70 per when he gets a kill in the ult. Meaning that you probably get anywhere from like 300 to 500 free health during a game, which is like the same as like maybe what you would get with Siphon Bullets if you have a good game. So yeah, I think this is probably one of the strongest patches for Mo and Krill as well. That gives him a lot more survivability. He was previously already strong when they added the headshot resistance. He's pretty difficult to deal with, and he has a strong laning stage, a lot of sustain, really difficult to deal with. And yeah, I just think he belongs up here. There. Very, very, very strong. You know what? Maybe I'm putting Ivy down here. Ivy's A tier. It's okay. I just realized that these heroes are definitely stronger than Ivy. Okay, next up we have Paradox. Paradox, I didn't even know that it was intended to work this way, but they fixed so that when you're headshotting, so a while ago they added a 20% headshot damage increase to your carbine. Now it also procs Headhunter and Crippling Headshot. It doesn't mean that you would do the damage from the Crippling Headshot proc, because the debuff will be applied after, but it still means that you're applying the debuff. So essentially, as long as you have Headhunter, this increases your kinetic carbine headshot damage by 130 damage. I've been playing a lot of Paradox recently, and she's now my best hero by far, winning probably 60 to 70% of my games with Paradox. And she, like I've said before, she's just everything that Bebop wants to be. Incredibly strong. And they added some damage to the wall now as well, because they previously removed the 10% damage from the wall unless you get a tier 2 upgrade. And yeah, she has so much impact. The swaps are so good. And especially the Veil Walker build, I don't know. She's just so damn good. I think she's right up here. I put her in S tier. Then we have 7. Stormcloud causes you to levitate up and down. This is a small buff, so you can't just insta headshot him, and the expand time is a little faster. But I just think 7 is ass. And I don't know if it's because the players are ass, but I just don't think 7 is good. I feel like every time I see a 7, he has the most souls, meaning that he steals farm from everybody else. Then he has the least objective damage and the least hero damage. And then he just gets way too greedy, buys way too many spirit items, and dies. And I think he's right down here. I just don't think he's good. I know, like, I've seen that they picked him in pro play too, and I don't understand it. Maybe I'm not smart enough to understand it, but I just have never seen 7 have the impact that like a Haze or an Infernus would have with the same amount of souls. I don't think that this game has the same kind of like late game versus early game carries compared to like what regular MOBAs have. Because sometimes you'll hear people say like, oh, but we're scaling. We have the late game comp. And to some extent, I do agree. But I just don't feel like it matters as much as in other MOBAs. I don't feel like, for instance, you have to get to 40k souls before Haze or Infernus is relevant. I don't feel like any hero is super weak in one stage of the game. Like in Dota, you have some heroes that like they need to farm for like 20 minutes before they can do anything, like Faceless Void and stuff. I don't feel like there's any hero like that in Deadlock. So I feel like maybe the whole early versus late game thing is a little overhyped. And I feel like it's more about, first of all, how good a comp is, because some comps are definitely just much better at winning mid-boss. If you have Abrams, you have Kelvin, you have Dynamo, you have Lash, you have Ivy Stun, all these heroes excel at winning the mid-boss fight. So you can like take much more risky mid-boss calls compared to like if you don't have all these different AoE stuns to secure it. But I don't feel like this game is as like scale dependent as other MOBAs. Meaning that even though like the games last longer now, I just still think 7 is garbage. Next up, we have Pocket. Pocket actually received no changes this time, but because Arcane Surge is now a thing, this item is actually really good on Pocket. Because I feel like Arcane Surge is the one item Pocket needed to finally have an ult build become really strong. You can buy Veil Walker and Shields and Diviner's Kevlar, or maybe even Shadow Weave. I've seen some Shadow Weave pockets too. You stealth in and you Arcane Surge before your ult, and it increases the AoE and the duration of his ult by 20%. It just never goes away. You just gotta go back to your base and wait for 20 seconds. So I think that Arcane Surge is making Pocket really strong. Pocket used to be S tier, but then they nerfed them a little bit in the last few patches, and I think it puts Pocket at the top of A tier. I still think it's the hero that I hate playing against the most. It used to be Yamato, but it's not anymore. But Pocket is really strong. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Anyway, next up we have... So Shiv has like this giant wall of text. But the funny thing about this giant wall of text is that it's actually not that much that has changed. Because knife cooldown reduced, cool, right? Slice of dice base damage increased by 5, but then the talent's reduced by 5. So this makes them slightly better early game because less of the power is in the talent, but throughout the game, not really a big deal. Then same here, slice of dice cooldown reduced 1 second, slightly better early game. Tier 1 efficiency increased. So all of this is irrelevant like 15 minutes into the game. Killing blow threshold increased from 20 to 22. But then the tier 2 reduced from 8 to 6. Once again, making him better early game, but no changes later on. Full rage damage bonus increased by 15 to 17. Tier 2 talent full rage bonus damage reduced to 8. So all of this is completely irrelevant 20 to 30 minutes into the game, or 15 or whatever, depending on what build you go. It's just a shitload of text that just basically says, we made Shiv slightly better before he gets his ability points. One thing they did change, though, was that they increased the cast range of Killing Blow. That's good, because they previously nerfed it a lot. And they also increased the rage per spirit damage slightly. I think Shiv is in a good spot. I don't think he's like one of the top heroes anymore, but I still think he's really good, and I think he belongs here. It's much less rare that he completely runs over a lobby like he used to, but he's in a good spot, I think. I think he's in a good spot. Okay, and then we have Vindicta. So Vindicta received a fair amount of changes this time. They made the cast delay on the Crow happen after you cast it, so it feels more smooth to use. It also now reduces spirit resistance by 6%, and then they changed the tier 3. So the Crow used to do a massive bleed. It used to do a massive bleed that made escalating exposure really strong. And it's not as massive anymore. Now it's bullet and spirit resistance reduction instead. This makes the Crow build a little bit worse, and it makes the gun and ult build a little bit better. They also increased the radius of the stake, and the disarm is gone. So stake used to disarm. Some people even played Echo Shard stake to disarm. They also put the charge up from Assassinate back in to 50%. They lowered it to 25 for a little bit. And Assassinate bonus damage on low HP reduced. They did nerf Assassinate a little bit, but not a lot. I think that a couple of patches ago, Vindicta was completely ridiculous. Now, I feel like Vindicta needs... Because the thing about Vindicta is that she still is the only hero that has an ult that can give you like 700 or 800 extra souls when you get a kill if your ult is maxed. So it's the only hero that can snowball more off of kills. So most Vindicta players, they will max their ult early to get that kind of souls advantage to buy a better item. But I feel like the only way a Vindicta ever completely pops off in a lobby is if she gets those like early 10 to 15 minutes ult kills to get ahead. I've never felt like Vindicta is a huge problem if she has the same amount of souls as everybody else. So I actually think that especially with the nerf to the Crow build, she's not as strong as she used to be. And I think she's at the top of B tier. There's also another thing, and that is I still think that this shouldn't be a thing, but apparently her ult procs, when her ult procs improved burst, if the target dies from improved burst and not the ult itself, I believe you don't get the extra souls. And that is a pretty significant difference, meaning that if like they are maybe like 40% health instead of 30, they won't get executed by the ult itself, but the improved burst proc that happens almost at the same time, but still slightly after the ult. It shows as you kill them with your ult, but you don't get the extra souls. So that is a little bit annoying, but that is only if you're executing targets that wouldn't have died if you didn't have it. But nonetheless, it's something to have in your consideration. All right, Viscous. Viscous Puddle Punch can now be parried. It doesn't stun Viscous, it just blocks the puddle effect from parry. It just means that you don't get puddle punched. It takes a while to get used to. I'm still a little bit newbie at it, but yeah. I don't think... You have to like be so aware. You have to be so like ready for it. You can parry it a few times in the laning stage. In an actual game, I don't think it changes a lot. I actually think that there was a bigger buff to Viscous by the fact that the new items are really good on this hero. So Viscous is one of those heroes that in a lot of cases would buy the Arcane Surge item because it makes his entire ult, the goo ball, 20% bigger and lasts for 20% longer. Because there's no duration limitation to Arcane Surge. You just dash jump and the next ability you pop has 20% more duration and reach. And because they recently changed it so goo ball now gets bigger when you add reach, this item just goes hand in hand with that. And I also think that Spirit Snatch is great on Viscous because you steal spirit resistance and spirit power from every target you hit. And Puddle Punch is very easy to hit multiple targets at once, and you can stack up. You can get over 100 spirit power if you hit a few 3 to 4 heroes with a Puddle Punch. So yeah, that makes Viscous pretty strong. I think he's right up next to Pocket in A tier. All right, next up we have Warden. Warden is a little bit interesting because Warden hasn't been the same since they nerfed Majestic Leap. There was a short period of time where they gave him Unstoppable while channeling his ult, meaning that his ult would just always go off. But then in the previous patch, they actually made it so that if you cast your ult and you get stunned, not only does it cancel the ult cast, it also puts your ult on a cooldown. And this is a massive nerf because this means that you got to be super careful when casting your ult, because if someone cancels your channel, your ult goes on a 2+ minute cooldown. Recently, there's been like most of the Warden builds have been slightly less spirit focused and slightly more gun focused. I don't think it changes very much. I think he's now much weaker in the laning stage. They lowered the fire rate's spirit scaling. This patch, he just got nerfed in general. And I still think that Warden is C tier. I don't think he's that great. I feel like the only time I see Warden popping off is when he's far ahead. I think Warden can definitely wreck some lower lobbies and stuff. And I've seen some pro players being really good with Warden too. But I feel like it requires like a very set amount of circumstances. I think in a lot of cases, he's definitely a win more hero. Like sometimes when he has that like movement speed and ult and everything, he just like flies in there. He goes crazy. I think he's great. But I don't think he's that great. Okay, next up we have Wraith. So one interesting thing about Wraith is that, I've mentioned this before, is that ever since Shadow Weave was made a gun item, Wraith has been non-stop nerfed. Literally every patch. Spirit scaling on cards reduced, damage on ult reduced, duration before the ult stun increased. She's just gotten nerfed and nerfed and nerfed and nerfed. Now they added spirit scaling to the tier 3. They made it so telekinesis now makes the target go up and down a bit, so you can't just spam headshots. She just keeps getting nerfed. But you know what's interesting? That I was watching the Deadlock tournament the other day, and one of the first bans was Wraith. And I found this to be very interesting. Because how can a hero get nerfed to the point where like over 20 to 30% of her damage output is gone, yet she still is like one of the first bans in the tournament? That's something that's very interesting to me. And that says something about what the hero can do. If you get Shadow Weave and Silence, or even Shadow Weave and Slowing Hex, and you start running people down, if this hero gets slightly ahead in the early to mid game, she's really hard to deal with. So yeah, I think that after these nerfs, I'm going to put her in B tier. I don't think she's as strong as Infernus and Haze, unless maybe in like a specific tournament setting or whatnot. So, but it is pretty interesting that this hero has gotten so many nerfs and she's still really good. All right, then we have finally Yamato. So in the previous patch, they made Yamato extremely broken. She not only got shit tons of resistance when she ulted, but she also had a self-heal of 30%, and you couldn't use healing reduction on that 30% heal. It would always go off because she removes all debuffs before she heals herself. So she was definitely S tier before that. Now they removed the heal on her ult and changed it to heals for 15% of your max HP on hero kill. Now I really like this change, because what I felt with Yamato was that she was allowed to make plays that were stupid, but she would get away with it because of how her hero is designed. You can just like toss yourself onto a mid boss and toss yourself onto so much stuff, and you would get away with it because you're Yamato. I think adding the healing of after a kill instead of just healing when you pop the ult is first of all a big nerf, but now it rewards playing well. Now it rewards like going for kills, finishing off targets, and playing like an assassin. And I feel like this makes more sense with what the hero is designed to be. It definitely makes her much weaker overall. I still think she's very strong, and when she's far ahead, she's one of the craziest heroes to deal with for sure. But I don't think she's overpowered anymore. I think she's like maybe like here. I still think she's extremely strong, but she's not dumb. That's the way I see it. She still has a really interesting toolkit, really hard to deal with in the laning stage. Good power spike as soon as you have your ult. And yeah. All right, that was this week's tier list. I didn't put anyone in D tier, and I have to say it's really hard to put someone in D tier. If I would put anyone in D tier, it would be Bebop. But I will say that the game is actually fairly balanced. They just added 3 new items, which means that they have to work a little bit on the rebalancing for the next coming weeks, because some heroes are more affected by these new items. I think Arcane Surge is definitely a little bit too good. I think Spirit Snatch is okay. And I think the upgrade to Soul Shredder bullets is really bad. I don't think the new weapon item is really good. Maybe if you play like Spirit Infernus or something maybe, but I don't think it's that good. So I expect to see a nerf to Arcane Surge and maybe some changes to some of the definitely McGinnis turrets. I would love for you guys to leave a comment down below to tell me which hero you think are the winner and loser of this patch, because that's always interesting to see, and let me know what your opinions are. I think Pocket is the one I'm not completely unsure about, because previously people constantly said that I was biased for putting Pocket in S tier because Bebop is really bad against Pocket. I still think Pocket's one of the most frustrating heroes to play against. But yeah. All right, don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching.